I have mentioned in the past that I participate in a type of therapy called DBT, that is dialectical behavioral therapy, created by Dr. Linehan. And I want to preface this video by just extending my gratitude to her, which I know she won't watch this, but just as an energetic extension of my deepest gratitude, I indeed owe her a debt of gratitude that I can't possibly express, because it is her therapy, in fact, which has helped me. Well, it has helped me tremendously in my life, generally speaking, but specifically applying the principles of DBT to my healing path from anorexia nervosa, as well as correcting much of the executive functioning challenges that I had continued to encounter from my Asperger's syndrome. So to backtrack, I was concurrently diagnosed at the age of 19 with anorexia nervosa and Asperger's syndrome. So I was evaluated by a clinician for the first time at that age. Looking back, and this is, by the way, no fault of my parents, but family dynamics and even cultural influences can be very complicated. I'll just put it that way so as not to go off on a tangent. It's a long story, so perhaps a story for another day. All of that to say, I was taken because my symptoms at that point of both my eating disorder and my what they now call ASD, that was interfering with my functioning in both my eating disorder as well as my Asperger's syndrome. So I was taken to a clinician and I was evaluated and assessed by her. Actually, it was a very long assessment, I recall. But anyway, knowing that I have made a full recovery now from anorexia nervosa, which is unfortunately a rarity, which is to say, at the time that I was receiving clinical attention for it, I was told that only about 2 or 3% of people make a full recovery from this illness, which is why anorexia nervosa is the deadliest of all mental disorders, because typically speaking, unless one recovers, that is, they turn the ship around and go in the direction of recovery, unfortunately, there's only one other option, which is descent into eventual starvation or complications related to the illness itself physically, or mentally speaking, it will accelerate to such a degree that the sufferer will take their own life in the form of suicide. The mortality rate is the highest of all mental illnesses. So it's often asked when people do recover from this, how did you recover? So it's going to be obviously different. The picture's going to be different for everyone because it's such a complicated illness, I will say. DBT is ultimately what really helped me recover, because up until that point, I was struggling with quasi-recovery and intermittent relapses in my attempts to recover, as well as having sprinkled in with my recovery various other forms of eating disorders and dysfunctional eating patterns and behaviors while I was trying to find my path towards recovery. So it was very, very messy and agonizing because I could not, even though I had decided at a certain point when I reached the, I was going to say peak, it's not a peak, when I reached the depths of my illness and when I had a long, hard look at myself and realized that I needed to turn this around or I was going to die from this illness. When that occurred, it was years beyond that point where I had made the decision to recover that I actually achieved any semblance of recovery. So I needed to be very patient with myself, but that's where the DBT came in, because when I embarked on that journey, the whole crux of DBT, and I encourage each of you, by the way, if you are struggling with any kind of, well, first of all, I think DBT can be tremendously helpful generally with interpersonal skills, with self-management skills. It's a great tool for life, I have found, in doing the course. But definitely if you have some kind of pathology or personality disorder, eating disorder, addiction, DBT can be enormously beneficial for you. So I highly encourage you. I will leave the resources that I used down below so that you can access them. And then I would also encourage you to seek out a DBT trained therapist that can facilitate your treatment should you be interested. But when I discovered DBT and it was brought to my attention, and I read a little bit about it and I started to immerse myself in it, I thought, okay, this, if there's any hope for me, this is going to be it, because I found it resonating so profoundly for me. And that, I will say, is key. So not every treatment modality is going to suit and serve everyone. Much like anything else in life, you might have to experiment with CBT or clinical treatment facilities, inpatient or outpatient. You might have to test drive several therapists even until you find the right fit for you. When I found out about DBT and I started immersing myself in it, I knew in my bones, I knew that this was the way forward for me, that if I had any chance of survival and thriving beyond my illness, that this was going to be the key to unlock that door, so to speak. And indeed it was. So I'm so grateful again to its creator for this. But the reason it was so helpful is because up until that point, I had struggled with my illness in such a enraptured way, because I was gripping onto it with my, I was like white knuckling it. Even when I wanted to recover, the way that my personality is, which is both a blessing and a burden, I have a tendency towards perfectionism. So I can get really scary when I set my mind on something, hence the anorexia. I declined in such a rapid, fantastic fashion into the illness because of my perfectionistic tendencies, which is very common in anorexic people. But up until that point, I was gripping so hard, like white knuckling it, even through my desire to be recovered, that I was impeding my own recovery because I was grasping so tightly to that desire to be free of this once and for all. And paradoxically, it blocked me from even taking the action steps towards any kind of functional recovery, because I was gripping so hard to the illness itself, like a security blanket. And so in order for me to literally let go of that and release myself from the grips of the illness, in order for that to happen, I had to reconcile the fact that I would still be ill for a matter of time before I could get better, that I would have to be both desiring to get better and still sick while I was recovering and healing. So that is exactly actually what DBT is. That's what DBT illustrates very beautifully. The whole thing about DBT is dialectics, the therapy of dialectics, which is that two opposing things or thoughts or scenarios or circumstances can be true at the same time. They're seemingly opposing, but they can coincide together, even in harmony. So understanding that and having a comprehension of that alone gave me an enormous sense of ease and trust in this process, which thinking about this, I'm getting emotional thinking about it, because I didn't trust myself for the longest time. Because if any of you have been through, doesn't even have to be anorexia nervosa, but if any of you have been through any kind of mental illness, there is a sense of, there is a self-deception, a manipulation involved, lying involved, and it begins with yourself. There's this sense that you are deceiving yourself constantly. Definitely in anorexia this takes place. It's full of deception and self-manipulation, and then it bleeds into your life where you manipulate others so that you can be married to the illness. And that's how the illness perpetuates and propagates, is because you are able to, first of all, lie to yourself and then lie to others around you to protect yourself and encase yourself in this cocoon of, in this case, anorexia nervosa, which of course perpetuates the illness. So getting unlocked from that it might as well be an impossible task. And even, at least in my experience, even when I wanted to recover and I made the decision and committed myself to recovery, like I said, it was years after that before I actually started to functionally recover in a meaningful way, even though I wanted it. Because it is so hard. The weight restoration, the mental work, the internal examination of why I was this way in the first place and what drove me to these behaviors, to self-harm in this way. So it's a lot of internal work, and DBT really helped me because it allowed me to start on my healing path, because I understood that I wouldn't have to abandon my security blanket while I was recovering. So in other words, I felt safe. I felt safe. I'm gonna get emotional again. I felt safe to express my feelings. I felt safe to feel my feelings. I felt safe to allow myself to feel compassion for making myself sick, for disturbing my family dynamics, for disturbing my relationships with this illness, for devoting so much of my time, energy, and attention to this illness, anorexia, at the neglect of literally everything else in my life. So I had to start with forgiving myself. That was the first step. And then the second step was I had to stop lying. Of course, when we're little, we're all taught not to lie. When we, as children, we lie routinely because it's a protective mechanism, because we are most narcissistic in our childhood, of course, because it's a survival instinct. We need attention. But as we get older, we learn the consequences of lying, both in the moral sense and interpersonal sense, that there are real consequences to lying, even white lying. So in anorexia nervosa, particularly, I was lying all the time, not necessarily to other people, although I did lie to my family to manipulate situations so I could be alone with my illness, as it were. But most of all, and more importantly and more unfortunately, I was lying constantly to myself. So it's a self-deception, it's a self-manipulation to keep myself protected and let that illness take over my life, and it did. So when I started to recover, after the forgiveness component, where I recognized I would have to exercise forgiveness and patience and compassion with myself in order to recover, the second piece of the puzzle for me that was integral was to stop lying. So I had to stop all the lying, all of it. And that really helped me on the path towards my recovery, because once I started to see things clearly, I started serving my recovery only, because I could see with a clear head that what I needed, when I wasn't lying to myself, what I needed was to restore a healthy weight. That was objectively what was needed for me to recover. So I would have to gain weight. I would have to face all kinds of fears that, because of my self-deception, I was preventing myself from facing, I was avoiding facing throughout my illness. So there was this whole new territory of unearthing the truth, and that was scary as hell for me, but that was an integral step. And that too was born out of my learning of what DBT, the skills that are learned in DBT, like radical acceptance, these real skills that, by the way, can be applied to our relationships with people, our friendships, interactions in the workplace. DBT skills are useful in all areas of life, I have found, but particularly in these pathological scenarios, they are tremendously helpful. But I would say the two biggest things for me were learning about forgiveness and compassion and approaching myself with that rather than negative narratives, negative storytelling, self-destructive judgments that I had about my behaviors or past actions against myself, abuse of my body, and all these things that I felt obviously regretful of, but that I didn't want to then compound the suffering by blaming myself for that. Because at the end of the day, an eating disorder or an addiction, they are coping mechanisms. So they are survival tools. So in a weird way, my anorexia nervosa kept me from dying. It kept me alive. However, left to my own devices, I think I would have gone down a path of eventual self-destruction and elimination, like self-elimination in one way or another, if I didn't consciously turn that around. So I'm not sitting here sharing any of this because I want to make it seem like recovery it's certainly not an easy process. It might not even be a realistic sounding one for someone who is in the depths of such an illness. But I would encourage you, if you are suffering or if you know someone who is suffering, there are resources available. There are professionals in the health space that are trained to do just this, to help people with this problem. So it's difficult to ask for help, but you have to, if the situation is dire, you need to reach out and ask for help, or you need to be courageous enough to, in full truth and transparency, say to yourself, like, I am in a bad situation and I have to pull myself out, or it's not going to end well. It's going to be over for me, game over. But yeah, I mean, I finished the course of DBT. It's a huge undertaking, and I don't think it's for everyone, especially if you are doing self-guided therapy. If you are working with a professional, I think it's better. Probably not everyone is quite fit to do this completely on their own, because it's such a taxing task. It really is. Mentally, time-wise, it's a time commitment, it's an energy commitment, it's exhausting, it's draining, it's mentally taxing for sure. But then so is mental illness. So if you reach a point where you are sick and tired of being sick and tired, so to speak, I do think that this can help. It certainly helped me, and I am now in a place where I'm fully recovered from anorexia nervosa, and I am in maintenance recovery. But the way I look at it is, the one thing I do is I'm very careful not to have any expectations, not just with this, but I have released my grip on expectations altogether. And I have found that life is much more peaceful and harmonious and livable for me that way, because when I have expectations, I'm already creating a potential disappointment or a potential failure. And what I want to do instead is just increase my failure rate. I want to experience more, think less, be less in the cerebral space and more in the experiential space of living my life and thriving in the present moment. So what helped me with that, I think, is like, the Tea with Mara story helped me tremendously. Radical acceptance. These philosophies that illustrate such beautiful and poignant wisdom that again can be applied in every area of existence and just elevate the quality of one's life. But once I let go actually of needing to recover, and especially like needing to recover in a certain way or in a ideal or perfect way, once I released that need and desire to get better and recover, it then opened up the whole field of like recovery for me, because it was just my gripping of needing to recover, and also my picture in my mind of imagining that it should look a certain way or feel a certain way or it should be this, or already that word should was creating an expectation, right? So releasing that is what I'm trying to say. Releasing it is what freed me for all the possibilities, including the possibility, by the way, of relapsing, including all of it, relapsing, dying. I opened myself up to every possibility imaginable, and therefore I had a wide open, spacious landscape through which to navigate my recovery. And for me, that brought me a tremendous sense of peace and willingness to embark on that path forward. And then I did get better, thankfully. Obviously, it wasn't like A to Z, and I'm just condensing it for the sake of making a video about it. It wasn't that like, oh, boom, I had this different lens through which to view my recovery, and then I recovered. It's not that easy. It's not that simple. It was very complicated. It took a very long time. It took a lot of hard work and tears and everything, and support from my family and my loved ones. It took a tremendous amount of all of this, everything, and a tremendous amount of energy from me and commitment. But once I committed myself to it, there was no turning back for me. So I've done it. I'm a success story, and it's one of the proudest things that I have managed to achieve in my life is surviving anorexia nervosa. Because many people don't survive. So before I get too emotional, I want to end the video by just saying, I don't know if any of what I've shared is helpful. When somebody is in the throes of an eating disorder, it's the prospect of ever recovering from it, I will say, it might as well seem like an impossible feat. It's so difficult, it cannot even be articulated in proper language, in my experience. However, there is hope, not to sound like a cheesy after-school special, but there is hope. There's hope in others that are willing and able to help you. And you need only express the willingness to receive that help, even if it is from your own self in the mirror and telling yourself that enough is enough. I'm ready to live now, and I'm ready to get better once and for all. You can do this. I'm living proof, and there are many others who have successfully recovered, not just from anorexia nervosa, but other eating disorders and other mental illnesses. You can recover, you can get help, you can improve. So I will once again leave the resources, the specific resources I used down below in my DBT course. They have been tremendously helpful. I still use them as reference material to this day, and I plan on revisiting it in the future should I need to. With that, I wish you all the best of luck. I want to thank you for watching as always, and that's it. That's all I wanted to say in this video. Thank you for watching.